What is average? Average is the bottom of goat and top of bad. Why would you not make a decision to be truly excellent in your particular business?
Welcome to the best of the first quarter of season 2 of the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Today, we'll be looking back at some of the most memorable conversations so far this year. Buckle up, it's going to be a wild ride.
I want to be as wealthy as Beyonce, but I can neither sing nor dance. So, I'm never going to be Beyonce, but Beyonce is never going to be me. Beyonce could not step into a courtroom and try, a case and get a $12 million verdict in, Jefferson County, Alabama. It's not going to happen.
I'm Michael Mogul, founder and CEO of Crisp Video, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. Today, we'll be looking back at some of our most iconic guests and the most jaw-dropping moments from 2021 so far. From becoming excellent in a world of compromise to why taking big risks can lead to even bigger rewards, this episode has it all.
Your mama might have this, or your dad might be rich, or you might have a network or a net worth, but you will not outwork me. That's effort. That's heart. That's desire.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. What better way to start this roundup than with the guest who kicked off season 2 of the podcast, Jay Papasan, executive speaker and best-selling author of The One Thing, The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. His book unveils a series of actionable strategies for becoming more productive by narrowing your focus. We discussed why Jay recommends throwing away your to-do list and replacing it with a success list.
A lot of us work from to-do list. A lot of us have a list of things that we know are our priorities. That's great. It's great to understand your priorities and have a plan. But if you can take it one step further and say, of all the things that I could do, what is the one thing that I should? And it's really, you're just saying, what's the 20% of this until you get to one, right? And I've watched people, we do this little exercise and we walk them through it just usually 2 or 3 turns, and they'll take a list of 25 things that they've remembered they have to do and identified usually no more than 5 things that actually matter. And what's even better, that handful of things that matter, there's a clear number 1. And when I look up in the days that I know that I knock out my number 1 first, I feel kind of righteous, right? Gary's fond of saying really successful people just have a great day before noon. So you get up and you knock out that true number 1. And then the rest of the day, you don't have to be quite so disciplined, right? Because that number 1 thing happened, it creates a lot of energy, right? It kind of dictates a lot of your other priorities, because in doing that thing, a lot of these other dominoes start falling and you have to chase them. So I could go on, but that is kind of the idea. And when I coach people, like someone in my office will say, coach me, how can I be more productive? That's the first place I take them. I want you to start with your to-do list, get a nag timer, I don't care. You don't have more than 5 minutes. I just want you to go, if I only got one thing done today that mattered the most, what would it be? That becomes your new number 1, and follow that same process. If I get that done, what's my number 2? If I get those done, what's my number 3? And you don't really have to go farther than about 4 or 5, because you're not going to do them all. And what happens magically, people do the 1 or 2, and a lot of the other stuff just suddenly doesn't matter at all. That's where the relief comes. I was like, oh, I thought I had all this stuff to do. Only a few things matter.
So I'd love to go deeper on that, because I know, as you mentioned throughout the book, that activity is often unrelated to productivity. We all know very busy people. And you talk about kind of the difference between like a to-do list and a success list. But what you just mentioned in terms of, realizing that most things don't matter, I'm sure there's going to be somebody listening and saying, you know what, guys, that sounds great, but if I only focus on these key things, well, how does the rest of that stuff even get handled?
Great question. Now we're getting into a business conversation in my mind. And that was the point of that essay. If you're doing the one thing that really drives your business forward, that's going to create increased reward that should allow you to hire help. I mean, when I think of the classic executive assistant or the admin, their job description is to take the 80% off your plate. Because there are things like there are boxes that just have to get checked, right? I mean, I think about the real estate transaction in our industry. There's a tremendous number of tasks. I think we figured it out, like over 200 tasks that happen during a transaction. And for salespeople, all that detail just drives them batty. So you have to earn the right as a business person to either delegate, right? Or you can hire someone part-time or full-time to do a lot of that. So that to me is how, if you really have to get them all done, it doesn't have to be just you. You can either pay to have a system or have an assistant that can do a lot of that for you. But I've had the day where instead of doing the top 5, I did the other 20. And I'll come home lathered in sweat. My wife will go, "How was your day?" And I'll say something like, "I was really busy. Like, I skipped lunch. I didn't know when I was going to go to the bathroom." Then you reflect and she goes, "Well, was it a good day?" And I'm like, "I'm not even sure. I did a bunch of stuff, but I'm not sure that it mattered." And those aren't the days that I'm proud of. Everybody has them. But the days that you really get knocked out the priorities, I could go on and on. Like, nobody's going to get a raise in their whatever law firm they're working for having a perfect attendance on every Zoom call. When they knock it out of the park doing their primary job, those are the people that get moved forward.
While Jay's less is more approach may make sense philosophically, oftentimes it's easier said than done. I asked Jay to elaborate on how leaders can put his ideas into practice and build long-term habits.
Discipline is training yourself to do something until it's automatic. And so a really formative experience, like I kind of intellectually understood that, and I could see it in Gary's life and in my own life at different times where I had taken the time to build a really powerful habit, whether it be diet or exercise or whatever. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of became automatic. And I was like, wow, okay, you go through this hard work period to build a habit, and then things get a lot easier for you. It's a lot easier to maintain. So I went to give a speech in Nashville, and I was going to teach literally all day on the book. And I show up at 7 o'clock. The class is going to start like at 9. And there's already someone sitting in the front row. And I assumed he was part of the staff. And I went up and I started chatting him up. And I said, "Hey, so what's your role here?" I just assumed I was there. I still had my cup of coffee. I'm there to get mic'd up. And he just introduced himself and said, "Oh, I'm early. And I'm here actually to hear you speak." And I'm like, "Dude, you're over an hour early." And he goes, "Yeah, it's a habit. I can't help it." And he said that habit word, and I just kind of, I got my focus. And I said, "Tell me more about that." He said, "It's been over a decade, but for 9 years, I was a Green Beret. And I was trained to show up early and observe before I act. And I just can't shake the habit." So here's something a decade in his past, this need to show up early. And he said it drove his wife crazy. They were always the first people at the movie, the first people at all these places. She hated waiting around, but it was just disciplined into him. And that's what we talk about, a disciplined soldier. They've trained on something until their reaction is automatic. And so we look up at these first couple of productivity issues, these lies, like when you know what your one thing is, like don't multitask. Wouldn't it be really awesome if I knew the number one thing that would make me a successful business person in the field of law? What would my number one thing be? What if I just made that thing a habit so that people just started to understand, oh, it's 10 o'clock. Michael's doing X, right? You train yourself and then the world gets trained too. And so we dove into this idea of how long does it take to form a habit? And when you read the book, I know you know the answer, Michael, and you clearly you've internalized it. What do most people think? How long do they think it takes to form a habit? Do you know?
So I was going to ask you about this because you usually hear it's 30 days or so, but you guys said it's much longer.
That's right. I had heard a lot throughout my life. It was 21 days, and occasionally you heard 30. And the 21 days, when you trace that lineage all the way back, there's actually a book called Psycho-Cybernetics that came out in 1974. And it was a book about self-image by a plastic surgeon. And he made a statement in there that he had observed that it took on average 21 days for his patients to become accustomed to their new appearance. And everyone started quoting him on that, saying it took 21 days to form a habit. And it was funny. We start bouncing between all these books, and when we trace them all back to the lineage, it comes from this idea that's not actually related to habits. So there was a group of researchers, and the research happened in 2009, that actually were looking into this, and they were looking for the point of automaticity. I can't say it fast, 3 times fast, you get it. Basically, how long do you have to do something in a row before it becomes about as automatic or as easy it's going to be? And so the power curve for them, when 95% of the effort went away, they called it a habit. And on average, people doing all kinds of stuff, I'm going to take the habit of doing 8 glasses of water. I'm going to go to yoga every day, whatever it was, didn't matter the habit. The average is about 66 days. And so the lesson to us is that if you really want to commit to forming a habit, it could take 2 to 3 times as long as most people give it to actually get the habit. And that benefit then that serves you lasts so much longer. And there's a danger in 66 days. It's great. We invite people to take 66-day challenges, and by and large, that works. But depending on you and your circumstances and what you're trying to do, it can take longer or shorter. We actually talked to the researchers. They shared like their actual graphs. On the low end, it took 18 days, and on the high end, it took over 250. And I think back, I've got kids. I don't know. I think you've got a 2-year-old. Welcome to the next stage, teaching them to brush their own teeth. It takes years to teach a kid to actually brush their teeth without being told. And they'll lie to you about it. I'm like, did you brush your teeth? Come here, let me smell your breath. And it's like, what? But now as an adult, right? You brush your teeth. You don't think about it. I can stumble in without any coffee or anything, and I can get that job done. And it's completely ingrained in me. Maybe once every 3 years, I'll make it to the car and go, oops. But for the most part, it's absolutely automatic. But it took time and effort. That's what we're talking about. You choose to be disciplined just long enough for the habit to form, and then you don't have to be that, quote, disciplined person. You're training yourself to do these things. And we can geek out on habits. I love James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. There's so much great research that's come out in the last 5 years. But I do think that if there's one ingredient to becoming superhuman, it's having the patience to focus on one habit at a time. What are the things that'll truly make me and optimize my performance, my whatever it is? And you don't need a million of them. Like I've interviewed 3 billionaires in the last 5 years. When they add up the things that really add up to their success that they're aware of, it's usually just a handful of things. And they're really boring, but they just do them again and again and again. And they got really good at them. The fundamentals never went out of style. They just got really good at them, and it's just automatic. They don't miss it.
Another popular misconception that Jay deconstructs with his work is the idea of a balanced life. In fact, Jay believes that we should replace the word balance with counterbalance.
This is something that we discovered along the way. This was one of those that we weren't really completely sure all the details. We just had a suspicion that the best businesses were often out of balance. And so this idea of a balanced life was maybe not going to serve people. And we kind of learned some bigger lessons than that. But the idea here is, if we just go right to the heart of it, balance is not a destination, right? When I'm public speaking, right, and I'm in a room with a bunch of people, I'll often ask people, if you're physically able, would you stand up on one foot? And I'll say, great. Are you balanced or are you balancing? And everybody's like, I'm balancing. And I'm like, thank you. It's a verb. It's not a noun. So there's not this place where you get everything in your life so organized. It's not a destination where I'm in balance. Everything's great. You have to do it, and it's an active thing. And the reality is, great businesses figure out what their one thing is, and they're really relentless about pursuing it. I mean, think about how technology's evolved into the minimum viable product. They figure out that feature, and they go all in on it to blow it up, right? And they're out of balance. There's a lot of stuff they're not doing because they know that if I do this thing well, everything else gets better. And you were sharing your stratospheric growth, right? There's a lot of fires that are going on while you're growing at that kind of pace. But if you do the right things, you've earned the right to get past that, and other people will help fix that as you go along, and you'll scale your way up. The challenge here is what works in business actually doesn't work in your personal life. This is one of the only places, almost everything else that I've learned around business, planning retreats, all of those things, absolutely work in your personal life. But this idea of absolute relentless focus to the abandonment of lesser priorities in business doesn't work for your health, for your spiritual life, sure as heck doesn't work for your key relationships. And we see people violate those all the time. So we talk about counterbalancing. If I have to go on the road for a few weeks, I'm going to take a few extra days off. I might even pull my kids out of school and say, hey, let's go do something together. I can't wait until I've retired and then hope they still want to hang out with me. I did all of this for you. I'm sorry I missed all of your birthdays, but now we get to spend time together. That's not going to work. That's not the way it works. So you have to counterbalance around those other things. And we all know people, I can visualize them, someone who is cheating with their health. They're clearly not healthy, but man, they are killing at work, right? There's a tab that they're running up that will come due. And it happens in all of these, it happens in your spiritual life. It can happen in your relationships. And so just understand there's work and there's your personal life. And in your personal life, if you leave things unattended for too long, they may not be waiting for you when you come back. In business, you can focus on those one things and either delegate the rest or let them wait until the one thing is done, and that works. So that is this whole balanced life thing. It's a little bit more of a complex idea, but it's an important one to internalize, because I think a lot of people have a lot of regrets when they violate it.
Jay Pappason's methods for living a balanced life are simple and actionable. But if you want to increase the likelihood of achieving your goals, your mental and physical health must be in peak state. I couldn't think of a better person to discuss peak performance with than the father of biohacking, Dave Asprey, who's also the founder and chairman of Bulletproof, innovator of Bulletproof Coffee, and New York Times bestselling author.
I realized, look, if we can troubleshoot the internet, which is cool because most of the internet is controlled by people who aren't you, yet somehow you can hack it, and I am a computer hacker by training, well, maybe I can turn that, how do I manage a complex system? How do I turn that knowledge around on myself? And I started measuring what worked. And I realized a lot of the stuff that I've been told was just BS. And it was dogma. It was a belief system, but it was not based on science. It was not based on our understanding now of how biology works. And it took a lot of studying. I eventually spent more than $1 million on hacking my own biology. And I've lost the weight. I've gotten younger. My brain has the response time of a 20-year-old. I have the visceral fat levels of a 20-year-old, and I'm 48. So something here is working, because if I could start out with all the diseases of aging before I was 30, we're talking prediabetes, high risk of stroke and heart attack, arthritis and cognitive dysfunction, and chronic fatigue syndrome. And I ditched all that. And I said, all right, I feel like I've achieved a sense of mastery over this subject matter, even though I have an MBA from Wharton and my degree's in artificial intelligence and computer information systems. So I'm going to start sharing this, because what I know is an algorithm for human performance. And you shouldn't be hungry all the time. You should have more energy than you need all of the time. So that state of being bulletproof is just saying, look, I know I've got what it takes to handle whatever life brings my way. It means I can maintain focus all day long. I can absorb information better than other people, and certainly better than I used to be able to. And I can remember it, I can recall it, I can structure it. And to an entrepreneur or someone who works in a cognitively demanding business environment, that is actually a sense of peace, because there's an effortlessness that can happen when you have enough biological energy.
Dave argues that we have more control over our health than we're led to believe, specifically when it comes to our diet. Dave is a huge advocate for intermittent fasting, which he unpacks in his most recent book, Fast This Way: How to Lose Weight, Get Smarter, and Live Your Longest, Healthiest Life. I asked Dave to elaborate on ways to maximize our mental energy and why we're best served by controlling our cravings.
Cravings just cost. There's no return on those. And what you find really quickly is if you start monitoring your mental state, like how much work was it now to read this 80-page brief? Or how much work is it now to get up and do what I'm going to do in my meetings today? Is it lower than normal, or is it higher than normal? If it's higher than normal, it's your fault. You did something. You slept like garbage last night. You had a glass of wine before dinner, which unfortunately isn't healthy. Sorry, I wish it was. It will lower your sleep quality. But what you will find is that if you said, this morning I'm going to make myself breakfast, and you have a healthy breakfast of oatmeal and croissants and carbohydrates and honey and God knows what, and you put who knows what else in your moldy coffee that you bought at the corner on your way into the office, you spend a lot of money and time on that, and the ROI was terrible. I will propose to you straightforward that if you had no breakfast, or you had bulletproof coffee for breakfast, you will actually have more mental clarity, and you'll save time, and you'll save a negligible amount of money. It's not really about money at that point. It's just about, did I have more energy, more focus? Yes, you did. And a side effect is you'll live longer. But hey, there's that.
I know we talked about the energy benefits of fasting, right? But what are some of the other health benefits? Because I know there's several other aspects of this, such as like burning fat and so on.
Well, there's something called autophagy. And what this is it means self-eating, if you go back to the Latin. And when your body is busy digesting breakfast, especially protein or carbs, what it does is it takes the enzymes that it would have used to repair your cells, to burn up old junky cells that either aren't doing anything or cells that are very weak cells and replace them with young cells. It takes the energy and it says, oh, I'll just use that energy to digest the eggs I had for breakfast. So having these periods of time when the body's repair systems, instead of digesting, are focused on repair and restoration, it makes a really big difference. And over time, what you start seeing is your body's ability to convert 30 pounds of air that you breathe every day and however much food you eat every day. All you really do is you combine those two to make electrons. The same electrons that power your iPhone are actually powering your body. And if you do a good job metabolically of converting those, you have a ton of energy. And 48% of people under age 40, and everyone over age 40 who's not on an anti-aging program, has mitochondrial dysfunction. They just suck at turning food and air into energy. And that means when you're in a high demand state, like say you're in front of a judge and there's $10 million on the line, well, you turned the volume all the way up, but it really only went up to 6 because your body forgot there was 7, 8, 9, and 10 available. And when you use intermittent fasting, which is effortless to do when you do it the way I'm talking about, we're not talking about being hypoglycemic, bitchy, or hangry, or weak, or distracted in the morning. We're talking about being better than you are now in the morning. You do that, all of a sudden, like, oh, wait, there is a 7, 8, and a 9, and a 10 on my energy knob. So when you stand up, like, man, I'm going to bring it. And I just got that fact. Oh, and I forgot I'm going to mention that. And you pull all this stuff together, and you're actually way stronger than you were before. And it's hard to express how relaxing it is to just have what's in your head available to you without having to stop and stress. And there's a lot of things that happen that I think are worth going through that are right in the book, Fast This Way. And it's useful, especially for attorneys, because this is how we're wired before we think. And this is something that knowing this about yourself is useful, and knowing it about the people that you're working for or against is also useful. And it's that all life forms follow this basic algorithm. And the first thing, if you were to design something to stay around forever, number one, if there is a threat, you, with 10 times more effort and focus, you must respond with fear, which is you run away from, kill, or hide. Right. And we've all seen people who freeze on the stand, or people who get really aggressive on the stand. In fact, if you're a trial lawyer, you're trained to make people aggressive, so they'll say stupid things, right? You poke at them until they get pissed, right? By the way, you can tell I've been deposed. So, all of that stuff happens. And then you also have the, I want to run away, anxiety, but all of those things, we're wired in our cells to do that.
I know there was a time you stated that you want to live to be 180 years old. And I'm sure people hearing this, that maybe there's going to be an eyebrow raise or two, but how did you come to that number? And this is always very fascinating to me because we do have the ability to live longer, and we're seeing a lot of just great science coming out and so on that's extending lifespans and so on. But how did you come to 180?
Well, I want to be really clear. It's at least 180. Because I think that's a conservative number. And now people are saying, Dave, that's such BS. But let me walk you through the logic. There are 5 people today who are 120 years old, well documented with, that's not a lot of people. Okay. 120 years ago, it was 1900. There's no airplanes. There's no cars. We were going to fight World War I, still on horseback for a lot of it. Okay. That's what the world looked like back then. We didn't understand bacteria. We didn't have antibiotics. We couldn't spell DNA because we hadn't invented it. It was a different world. And they're still around. Look at what's happened in that one lifetime. Now, if the best we can do today is 120, if we can't do 50% better than our best in the next 100 freaking years, it's because a comet hit the planet. Now, as a part of becoming an expert level biohacker, for more than a decade, I ran an anti-aging nonprofit group where we'd bring experts in and interview them in front of a group of about 100 people in Palo Alto, California. And we would talk about this. And I met people when I was in my 20s who were in their 80s who had more energy than I did. And they were full of life and full of energy. I'm like, I want that because I didn't have it when I was young. And I got that. And so I've seen it happen. And I've become friends with the top researchers. I've interviewed 850 of them on Bulletproof Radio. 850 people, not all of them are anti-aging doctors, but people doing the clinical research. And for the first time ever, You can have someone with tenure at a major academic institution stand up and say, we can reverse biological aging in cells. If you'd have said that 10 years ago, they'd have taken your tenure and laughed you out of there. They would have blackballed you. And it's because they've been working on it for 20 and 30 years. And we are right now at the point where we understand more about our biology than any time in human history. And it is becoming possible. And right now, yes, I wrote a whole book about that. And I've done all the treatments that the billionaires do. And I wrote about what it's like. But it's going to become like cell phones were. If you're an older attorney listening to this, you remember the early 90s. And that was when the first mobile phones became available. Maybe it was the late 80s. And you'd see people in their Mercedes convertible 300D, and the whole trunk is a cell phone, and it costs $50,000 for the phone, and it's $25 a minute, and they're driving down the road. Everyone's like, look at that jerk. Who does he think he is, right? Well, you can buy a smartphone in Africa for $1 a month today in our lifetime. That's how fast things change. We're in an era of exponential change. So of course we're going to live to at least 180 if a piano doesn't hit you and if you can afford it, but the costs will drop dramatically. If you want to do that, you have to make it to the point when all of these advances come out and are available. You must start intermittent fasting. It is easier than having breakfast, but the anti-aging benefits of it are so strong, and the cognitive benefits of it are so strong, and just feeling good all the time benefits are so strong. You do it now, it's going to add years to your life. And if you did no other interventions, it just means that the last 10 or 20 years of your life, you won't be wearing diapers, you won't have hoses where you don't want them, and you'll remember your own name. That's how important intermittent fasting is. That's why I wrote a book about it. I only write about books that are worth people's time to read. And this is based on 10 years of doing it and 10 years of helping people lose 1 million pounds on the Bulletproof Diet, which has always included intermittent fasting. And this idea that, oh, you have to do it and you have to live your life and be a successful, busy executive at the same time, that's missing from a lot of the health stuff. Like, oh, we tested mice. We tested patients who weren't doing anything. Well, no, the people listening to this podcast, they have stuff to do. So how do you do the fasting thing? How do you do the other things that make you younger and stronger and faster and smarter and still do what you're here to do? That's the challenge. And that's why it's different than, human performance optimization. Screw optimization. I just want more. I want better. I want faster, stronger, longer lived, more energy. And I don't want to give anything up to do it. And to optimize, I have to say, oh, I just gave up, dinner with friends every night because I had to go to the gym for 2 hours or whatever kind of stuff. That's an optimization. No, I don't want to do that. I simply want better.
While Dave Asprey is an expert on human performance optimization, our next guest is an expert on relationship maximization. John Ruhlin is the founder and CEO of Giftology Group and the author of the best-selling book, Giftology, The Art and Science of Using Gifts to Cut Through the Noise, Increase Referrals, and Strengthen Retention. During our conversation, John explained how to give gifts strategically in the form of what he calls practical luxuries.
Guys are the worst at this. Like, guys think about giving their wife a gift, the day before, like anniversary or birthday, like linear, check the box. But most people aren't thinking very strategically. Like, whether you're a lawyer or a CEO, we think I like bourbon, I'm going to give bourbon. I like golf, let's take people golfing. I like steaks, let's take people out for steaks. We're very we give what we like to receive. And that's why if you've read the book, The 5 Love Languages, we tend to marry our opposites. There's 5 different types. And Gary Chapman, who wrote the book, is a mentor of mine. And most people tend to give love the way they like to receive it. And love is a weird word to use in business, but we do talk about loving on our clients or we want to build a relationship. At the end of the day, all businesses rise and fall in that relationship. So the reason we use practical luxury is the practical part is you don't need another freaking paperweight. You don't need another bottle of wine. You don't need another Amazon gift card. Like Michael Mogill and most of the people that are listening to this podcast can afford what they want. If you like bourbon, you go buy bourbon. If you like a jacket, you go buy a jacket. So if you find something that you can give to somebody that they'll actually use, that they don't already have 10 of, people are like, oh, I want to send Bose headphones. I'm like, that was cool 30 years ago. I want to send an iPad. I have 5 iPads that are unused in a box at home because people think, oh, I saw somebody give an iPad. Let's do that. I saw somebody give this cool widget or this cool jacket. They don't want to really wear your stupid Cutter and Buck jacket. So practical is the usability side. Most people would never go spend 12 grand or even, one knife might be $200. Most people have the set that they got for their wedding of knives at Bed Bath & Beyond or Nordstrom or Williams Sonoma. So if you send somebody a $200 knife that's engraved with their name and their family name on it, the likelihood of them actually using it is the practical side. The luxury side is most people, when they do a gift, it's like, hey, what can you afford on a watch? They're like, I don't know, my budget's $500. So you get all excited and you're like, hey, I'm going to send Seiko watches to all my clients or Apple watches. Meanwhile, most of your clients, what do they have on their wrist? They have a Rolex or a Breitling or a Patek or whatever. So you spent $500 thinking, I'm going to give this great gift. I'm generous. But what you really did is spend $500 to look embarrassing, to give them guilt, because the person gets it and is like, oh, this is $500, but I'm not taking the Rolex off my wrist to put on your Seiko or your Apple Watch. So the luxury part is, if you're not willing to do best in class on a watch, you don't have to send a Rolex. Why don't you go give a knife or give like we do these crazy, they're called artifact mugs, $1,000 mugs. You send it to somebody, people $1,000. I'm like, I've had billionaires cry and say it's more valuable than their $50,000 watch. Why? Because of the personalization. It tells somebody's legacy and life story. So unless you're willing to go best in class in a category and make it nicer than what the person already has, then they're not going to use it. They're going to re-gift it. They're going to put it on a shelf. They're going to tell you thank you because they have gift guilt. Nobody ever says, I thought less of you as a human when I got your Seiko watch or when I got your bottle of bourbon and my dad's actually an alcoholic. But that's what goes through their head. And so people, and I see lawyers are some of the worst at this, whether it's your spouse, like if you buy your wife a four-wheeler and she hates the outdoors, was the gift for her, for Mother's Day. It wasn't a gift for her, it was a gift for you. And in business, we do the same thing. We send steaks because we like steak. We send these jackets because I like the jacket. I send headphones because I like technology. The gift isn't about you. A gift by its very nature, if you want it to move somebody's heart, better be about the other freaking person.
I know when it comes to gift giving, you argue that not every gift needs to create a return for it to be a successful investment. If you could elaborate on that.
Well, I think that most people want to start with prospects, and that's the last person you should be appreciating. Most people get excited about taking care of their cold market, their whales, and that's fine. I like whale hunting as much as anybody. Like I love, getting the phone call from a Lewis Howes or a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. But what I found is that most people where they should be starting is with their employees. If you want your employees to deliver Ritz-Carlton service and they've never stayed at the Ritz-Carlton, how's that working out for you? Like it doesn't. Most people will treat their clients or their prospects at a Ritz-Carlton level, and then the employees get the Motel 6. So in our opinion, if you want loyalty and engagement with your team, which most people like, recruiting good talent and having good people that are engaged is an important thing. You know this with a fast growing company, you need people that are not just bought into the dollar sign, they're bought into the mission, they're bought into you, and they realize that you care about them. So there are times where like, what's the ROI or the return on relationship to have engaged employees? I mean, it's worth a lot of money. How much is it worth? I don't know. But what we found is that like we're doing things for our team. We started like 7 years ago doing something. We realized that all of our employees, they work remotely. There are a lot of stay-at-home moms, college educated, they have kids, husbands, whatever else. We started to pay for house cleaning. It cost us $2,500 an employee per year. And people are like, how do you afford that? Like when I spoke at Google, they're like, oh my gosh, how could you afford $2,500 a person a year? I'm like, when you hire somebody at Google, you'll pay an engineer, $225,000 to $235,000 or $225,000 to $250,000, or maybe an admin, you're paying $65,000 to $75,000. That's a $10,000 delta that when you hire and add overhead and labor, you don't even think two rips about it. 10 grand per employee. Imagine if you, instead of just saying, hey, how can I get the most out of the employee and how can I like cut costs? Like nobody brags about their 401k, and it costs us business owners a crap ton of money. You want to know what they do brag to their family and friends about? House cleaning every other week. Why? Because it gives them time with their family back. It gives them time with their kids back. It gives them time to have a hobby. And so thinking strategically about how you're building relationships, when we take people through an assessment, we look at all of their relationships, their suppliers. Like a lot of businesses don't have a business without suppliers. Like I send nicer gifts to Cutco, the knife company I buy millions of dollars from, than most people send their best clients. Why? Because I need them. I need my vendors. And most people treat their vendors like crap. And then they wonder why nobody wants to run through walls for them. Well, you treat them like a-hole, you treat them like dirt, and then you want a favor from them. That's not how relationships work. So during the assessment, we go around and say, hey, your employees, what's the value of them? What's it cost to recruit a new person? What's it cost when you're growing and you need that person, or you lose that person and they had the relationship with that firm that you're going, or that company, that Fortune 500 company. So for me, it's not always just a put $1 in and get $20 back out, because you can't always tell. But we all know we're emotional beings. We all know that people will leave a company, not because of pay. It's like pay is typically 4 or 5. It's usually because they don't, like, number 1 or 2 is they don't feel respected or appreciated.
John argues that one raving fan is worth more than 100 satisfied customers, and that law firm owners should constantly be looking for ways to build loyalty with their most valued clients and referral sources. I asked him to share some of the best methods for building relationships and getting referrals.
My view is that you should be getting a lot of referrals without asking. We built a course around it, referralswithout.asking.com. You can go watch the video series talking about it. Like, referrals should be something that naturally happen. What we talk about is active loyalty versus passive loyalty. Most people think if they retain a client, that's loyalty. And I'm like, we've all had employees that have stuck around and they were loyal, and we actually wish they would have left. Like, they're actively disengaged. They're staying, but a loyal employee or a loyal client or a loyal center of influence or referral partner is somebody that doesn't just say, if somebody asks them, hey, what law firm do you use? When you have an actively loyal relationship, they're going out of their way at dinners and golf outings, whatever else, and looking for an opportunity to bring your name up, even if it's a little bit awkward or uncomfortable. Like, think about when we all have actively loyal relationships, but most people have like 1 or 2. They have 1 or 2 people that they love them and they're bought in. And those are the people that send lots of deal flow and lots of referrals because they're fully bought in, but their loyalty is not all equal. Actively loyal relationships are going and advocating on behalf of you without you even asking. And what we've shown, the way that we've landed the biggest stages in the world on speaking, the biggest clients in the world on gifting, is I've been able to love on people sometimes for 7 years before they started sending deal flow. Most people send 1 or 2 gifts to only the people that are referring. And what they don't realize is that within their warm market, they're leaving money on the table. And if they would show up for people, everybody says they're in a relationship building business, even if you sell toilet paper. But lawyers, everybody would say it's trust and relationship. A lawyer is handling some of the most intimate things you could possibly handle for somebody. And yet most of the time, when do we give gifts? When a deal's done, when a referral's given. What did you just turn that relationship into? A tit for tat, a transactional relationship. Is that what you want? No. But subconsciously, you're like, somebody sends you $1 million lead or a $250,000 referral, and it closes, and you think, I'm generous. I'm going to send a case of Opus One. Like, hey, it's a couple grand. But in their head, they're thinking, wow, man, that guy just made $1 million. I would have thought maybe he would have sent something more, because now he's equating it, he's weighing it, and it doesn't feel equal. Whereas if you just sent the case of Opus One as hey, I just appreciate who you are as a person. I just appreciate the relationship, not tied to a deal or not tied to a referral. The other person, I don't like wine, by the way, as a gift, because in marketing, you should be measuring cost per impression. And you send 6 or 12 bottles of wine, you're getting 6 or 12 impressions. I'd rather send something that's getting 6,000 or 12,000 thoughts versus 6 or 12. That's how you can afford to spend more and actually get more impact over the long haul. And your cost per impression goes down significantly. But even something like wine, a gift that's on our top 10 do not give list, if it showed up as a just because of the relationship versus showing up as a transactional tit for tat. And so that's where, when we lay out a plan, we call it a relationship plan, and do the assessment, we tell people, you got to be doing gifts at planned randomness. You're sending it out to them, not because it's renewal time, not because they just signed $1 million case with you or whatever else. You're sending it just because. We'll literally send 10,000 knife sets out, and every single person feels like they're the only ones that received it. Why? Because the timing. We didn't tie it to a deal, an anniversary, a birthday, Christmas. You send a love bomb or a gift out of the blue to people, and they're like, I didn't give a referral. I didn't do a deal. Oh my gosh, Michael was just thinking about me. Steve was just thinking about, it changes all of a sudden. Now that person, because we all have built into us in our DNA reciprocity. When somebody shows up for us over and over and over again, guess what we want to do? We want to do something back for them. That's how God's wired us. Whether you're a person of faith or not, I'm not getting woo-woo or transcendental or anything. When you make a deposit into somebody consistently, as a human nature, we want to do something nice back. And so when I talk about referrals without asking, The whole concept is, how do I be proactive and show up for people for no other reason than a just because? And if you do that consistently, all of a sudden, the tsunami starts to build, and people start looking out for you to look for opportunities on the golf course to send you deals.
While strategic gifting can be one of the best ways to generate referrals, it won't drive long-term relationships unless you're also providing your clients with a consistent world-class experience. Horst Schulze, the co-founder of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group and the best-selling author of Excellence Wins, a no-nonsense guide to becoming the best in a world of compromise, explains why leaders should never settle for simply being average.
Yeah, in fact, I talked to people who said, we are a good average. What is average? Average is the bottom of goat and top of bad. Why would you not make a decision to be truly excellent in your particular business? That was the vision of the company. I left a great job because I could create that vision for this new company, which eventually was called Ritz-Carlton. But I questioned myself at the same time, and that's a key leadership element. What is your vision for your company? And what is good for all concerned? For the investor, for the employees, for the customer, for society as a whole. That is your responsibility as a leader, to create something that is good for all concerned. And I'm clearly determined that creating the best hotel company in the world would be good, excellent for all concerned. And in that moment, I could not compromise anymore. In that moment, when I knew I come to work, I could not compromise for myself, nor for any individual or any situation, that effort to become the best in the world, because I knew it would be great service, great for all concerned.
I know you talk about that no matter what business you're in, the three things that are key to achieving excellence are people, systems, and service. But I'm curious, how would you rank those if you had to rank them 1, 2, and 3?
Well, you cannot do it with either one. I mean, if you imagine, you look at your left and you see a lot of people there. Those are your potential customers and customers. And on the right, there are a lot of people too. Those are your employees. So no matter what business you're in, you have to understand what the customer expects from your product. You have to now make sure that the employee totally understands what that customer wants from you. And then as managers, you create systems, processes, measurements, controls to make sure that delivery happens. Now, leadership in turn is a situation where the leader creates an environment in which the employee actually wants to do that. So it's people and product. They come together for the benefit of the customer. And the final benefit, of course, for your investors and for all concerned. You cannot eliminate one of them. That's possible. But in the delivery, the most important thing, by the way, is not the product itself. It's the service. The product has to be excellent. But the real driver of customer loyalty is the service delivery. And there's something, in fact, very fascinating, that we know that 70% of the market would be willing to pay more for the same product if the service is excellent. In other words, if you create a product and your competitor creates the same product, the customer is willing to pay more for your product if you give them good service. That's a relationship element. A service is the moment you make contact with that customer and pay attention to the customer. So service is essential in that equation if I want to have loyal customers.
While no business is perfect, when a client complaint arises, our response is up to us. I asked Horst to elaborate on how leaders can empower their teams to own complaints and turn what could be terrorists against your business into ambassadors for your brand.
A great company really does 4 things. A truly great organization concentrates, number one, of keeping the customers that you have. Number one. And number 2, you find new ones. Number 3, you get as much money as you can from the customer without losing them. That means you're giving value. And number 4, you do it all efficiently. That's a great company. Now, if I want to keep that customer, if that's number one, and it should be, then I have to move heaven and earth to keep them actually. Then I have to make sure that I empower my employees to make sure that I have loyal customers. We have to understand here, there are three types of customers out there. There's the dissatisfied customer. The dissatisfied customer becomes a terrorist against your company. They can go on social networking today and destroy you. You don't want that. Number two, you have the satisfied customers. They're not yours. They're satisfied with your product, but they may go next door if there's a better offering. And then there is the loyal customer. You don't want to lose them. So what if a customer has a problem and may become a terrorist? If I have an employee who is empowered up to $2,000, let's say it is the busboy in the morning in a hotel, you can refer it in your business as you want, and the guest comes in the morning for breakfast, and the busboy says, "Good morning, sir, I hope you have a nice stay," and the guest says, "No, I didn't. There was a lot of noise in the corridor and my TV didn't work." The busboy now is empowered to make sure that customer, we are not going to lose that customer. The busboy now can say, "Please forgive me, sir." In fact, that's all of our employees were certified to do it that way. "Please forgive me, sir. In fact, I feel so bad, I will buy a breakfast." You see, we taught problem resolution. You own the complaint if you get it, even if it wasn't your area. Buying the breakfast, sending fruit bars, we delight them. Saying sorry, a busboy saying sorry and saying, "Please forgive me," and buying breakfast, that guest will be overwhelmed. And instead of becoming terrorists, they become an ambassador. You cannot afford anymore today to have customers go out there and go into social networking and destroy you. You are not seeing the customer, your employees do, so you have to empower them.
This comes up with every successful leader I speak with, the importance of people. But if you could speak to how you find the right person for the right role.
Yeah, well, but most people just hire. You cannot hire, you have to select. You have to understand the talents that you need in each job category. What's the talent that you really need? What's the talent the person has to have to fulfill a certain job? That's the profile of a job. You have to develop a profile for each job category and the talent that's needed, and then hire against that. Then identify what questions do you have to ask the applicant. What do you have to ask in order to identify the talents that they have and where they fit, and not just hire. I give you a silly example. One, for instance, doorman in a hotel. It has to be somebody who likes the outdoors. I have to identify what is your hobby. If gardening was the hobby, we happen to know, having many, many doormen, that the 5 best doormen liked gardening. They like to be outside. But if I don't know that, if I don't apply that in my interview, and said, then I may hire somebody who really likes to sit inside in a computer room, and I put him outside. That won't work. So I have to be very clear, and there are many other talents needed for this particular job, for every job. So I have to develop the questions, I have to develop the talent, I have to develop the questions, the identification, to be sure I can identify what talent the person has in front of me and hire accordingly. Of course, the next thing is that is not done by companies, is create orientation. The first day of work in most companies goes somewhat like that. You come in, you fill all kind of papers out, and then the boss talks to you and says, "We are a team here." Oh, this is a pathetic speech, I'm sorry. "We're a team here." Well, what is a team? A team is a group of people who have a common objective and helps each other toward that objective. But we don't tell them the common objective of the organization. The common objective in the case of Ritz-Carlton was our vision. We want to be the best in the world. Now join me in that common objective. And here is what the motive of that objective. The motive is so we grow. Now I have to collect my motive, connect to the employee's motive. So we grow. So you have opportunity, etc., etc. You have to give them the objective. And then what else do we do when a new employee starts? Generally, we turn them over to somebody else who knows the ropes. You're not in rope business, but you take Bill, the new employee, and turn him over to Joe, who knows the ropes. And what happens? On the way to the kitchen or whatever they're doing, Joe, the old waiter, tells Bill, the new waiter, this company sucks. That's their orientation. And then we have expectations of them. You cannot let that happen. The first day of an employee's work should be fill out a paper, yes, and then spend time to tell them who you are. What is your heart, your soul as an organization? Invite them to truly join you. We make the mistake by hiring. We hire them, as I said before, not by profile, by talent. And we hire them not to join us. We hire our employees to fulfill a function. In our case, maybe to cook, maybe to clean rooms, or any one of those functions. But you see, the chair on which you're sitting is fulfilling a function. We should hire people to join who we are, to become part of us, and then explain it before you hire them, and explain it again the day when you start working. Here's who we are. Here's where we want to go. Here's how that is good for you. Here's our vision, which is good for you and for all concerned. So come in, fulfill your function to the best of your ability. That is done in order to accomplish the purpose that you have, the vision that we have. So we are not given just a job, we're giving purpose. And we know for thousands of years, since Aristotle, if you will, that people need purpose and belonging. So why don't we give it?
We can all take a lesson from Horst's playbook. As he explains, before you can demand excellence from your team, you must first demand excellence from yourself. And speaking of excellence, I asked Sarah Williams, renowned trial attorney and adjunct professor, what separates the good trial lawyers from the great ones.
So I think the thing that differentiates a good trial lawyer from a great trial lawyer is the willingness to do things and try cases in a way that goes against the grain of how we've been trained. My trial team coach used to tell us all the time, the number one thing that you have to get over in terms of training as a trial lawyer is the thing you have to do to become a trial lawyer, and that is go to law school. Because most law schools do not prepare you to just be a regular person and talk to people as you were before you became a lawyer. I think people who try cases tend to talk at juries instead of talking with juries. And so I think those who flip the switch, as I would say, from good to great, really know themselves, figure out who they are, and then they are themselves in front of a jury, whoever that is. And I think authenticity resonates with juries, and just being normal resonates with juries more so than any other flashy trial advocacy technique.
The next thing I want to go into, and I mean, I think you will appreciate this, but this is something I've always admired about you in the sense that you've been, I mean, every time I speak with you, you're always a very positive person. You're always a very happy person. But I imagine that you experience a number of challenges. I mean, one, being a female attorney, but also a woman of color. Like, I mean, you could speak to what were some of the barriers or challenges you experienced on the way to, let's say, getting to where you are today?
It was difficult. I think one of the toughest aspects of practicing in the South is, for some reason, plaintiffs' firms here do not hire minority attorneys a ton. Our bar is not very diverse. And so coming out of law school, luckily the defense firms, have a lot of pressure from corporate clients to diversify their teams. So that was always a struggle. But I will tell you that the primary struggle is in terms of identity. It is in not being concerned about sounding like a Black woman or being perceived as the angry Black woman. Now, you're right. I have a naturally kind of sunny disposition, but, not always. And in having direct conversations, there are always those prejudices that you have to deal with, and they can be internalized. And I will tell you, I had them internalized. And when I went to law school, it was the first time when I started practicing with my trial coach, who's a judge here in Alabama, who, you know, I credit with creating an environment that made me feel safe enough to be myself without worrying about, you know, let me be a little timid because I don't want them to think I'm, you know, mad, or, you know, let me hide my emotion because I don't want them to perceive me this way. Or even when it comes to my voice, like if this interview were being conducted in 2002, I would be speaking to you completely different. And it was because, you know, and I think most Black professionals my age have been taught to have, you know, the code switch. You have one voice for white folks and for the world. And then when we're in our own circle, you have another voice. And those are the things that I think hold us back, because I see it even, you know, in our practice. Like if I can't get to know the real you, then I'm hesitant to hire you. You know, if a jury thinks that you are not being authentic, then they don't connect with you. And so those were barriers for me. It's that things that we just inherited that really were ingrained. And I was just, you know, lucky enough to be in a situation and in an environment where I was made to feel like my voice was valued. And so, you know, my natural speaking voice was able to be developed. And that has helped me throughout my career to advance, because I am very comfortable with myself.
Sarah often speaks about the importance of developing confidence both in and out of the courtroom. I asked her to elaborate on how she developed her own confidence.
Here is my theory on confidence. And I'm gonna give you a preview to my next video shoot. I've got y'all coming in next week. And I've written about this particular subject because I think it's important. I think that the idea that women professionals are not confident is a myth. So I was always confident in myself. I knew I was smart. I knew I was smarter than most of the people in my class. I knew I was good at the things that I like to do, and that I played the flute. I played the piano. You know, like for 1 year, I was the best power forward in our division in Germany. So like when I decide to do something, I excel at it. And so I think what happens though is, as girls, what we learn growing up is the outwardly display of confidence is frowned upon, right? So you see a confident woman walk in and you're like, who does she think she is? Right? Or you tell someone about something that you did and they're like, oh, you think you're this, you think you're that. You know, we're not encouraged to brag on ourselves. And so I think all of us eventually internalize, like, I'm confident in my own head, but I have understood that society doesn't like me expressing that. So for me, it was more so, once I think you are comfortable with who you are and you make the decision. I made the decision in law school, because I wouldn't say, like, if you were to meet people that went to high school with me, like, I didn't talk my entire 10th grade year. So, I mean, there are folks who thought I was like a deaf person because I was so shy and just so internalized, because I had learned, like, if I am this kind of outgoing, outwardly confident person, people don't expect that. Like, how dare this heavyset Black woman walk through this world being confident, right? That's not what we expect, and that's not what the world shows us. And I think some of it is, you just got to give the middle finger to the world. And that's just where I am in life. I am, you know, just done with being a person who people expect me to be. I'm going to be myself. And that's either going to be something that's receptive to you or something that is not receptive to you. And what I've just happened to learn is people like me. And so I think that that's it. I think it's just deciding you are going to outwardly be who you know you are on the inside.
Part of Sarah's approach towards authenticity is owning every aspect of who you are. I asked her to delve deeper into why she believes leaders should double down on their strengths rather than attempt to improve their weaknesses.
Everything is hard, right? You know, work is hard. But I think it is harder when you're going in opposition to what you truly want. But I think the problem is people spend more time looking at what everyone else is doing and then thinking about what it is they truly desire. Like we've become this society of just, we're just so voyeuristic, right? It's like we want things and we want a lifestyle. And so we think we have to emulate whoever that person is that has that lifestyle. Listen, I want to be as wealthy as Beyonce, but I can neither sing nor dance. So, I'm never going to be Beyonce, but Beyonce is never going to be me. Beyonce could not step into a courtroom and try, a case and get a $12 million verdict in, Jefferson County, Alabama. It's not going to happen. So you have to find your thing, but that takes work and that takes looking within and not outside of yourself. And I think that people don't do that enough. We're too busy looking outside. We're too busy looking at what everyone else is doing versus really examining what do I like? What do I love? What really gets me up in the morning? And then folks end up miserable, at jobs that they think they have to have and they have to stay in when those jobs really don't serve them.
There's a lot of people out there giving advice. What's been the best advice you've received? What's been the worst advice you've received?
Gosh, I've gotten some really great advice. The best advice, not ever. One of the best things, and I like to use this, my mentor in law school used to say, just be the spoon, right? Like do your job, do your thing. The spoon can't be the fork. It can't spear things and pick them up. The spoon can't be the knife. It can't cut things, but the spoon has a job to do, and that job is important. So if you just focus on, just be the spoon, just focus on the thing you need to do, the thing that you do, and tune out trying to be like anything else. And so that's one of the things that has kind of carried me and I try to live by. The worst advice I have ever gotten, not ever gotten, but the worst advice that I've gotten, and I know he's going to listen because my daddy listens to like everything I do, which I love you, Pop. But back when I was a second year associate, and I was considering leaving my first job to go to another firm to learn a different skill set because I was wanting to handle bigger cases and different types of cases with more at stake. And my dad was like, "You're crazy. You have a good job, you're making X amount, that's more than me and your mama make, and you just need to stay there and, just stay there and work your way up." And for me, that was the worst advice. And I tell students all the time, I am a firm believer in you chase skills. And if that means that you have to leave the place you are in to get a new skill set, then you just have to go. And so I'm so glad I didn't take his advice because interestingly, I left that firm and went to 2 other firms, learned to become a trucking lawyer, and then was asked to come back to my first firm as a partner. And that's, eventually where we all left and then joined Alex. So had I taken my father's advice, I would not be sitting here. I would not be in this office. I would not have the skills that I need to do this job because I, would have done the same thing for 16 years.
Sarah emphasizes the importance of leading authentically. This often means that leaders must check their egos at the door, ask for help, and open themselves up to the idea of aligning with people whose unique strengths balance out your weaknesses. I speak from personal experience with our next guest, Jessica Mogul, who is a master of operational execution, serves as the leadership coach to many 8-figure law firm owners across the country, and is the head of coaching strategy at Crisp. And yes, she also happens to be my wife. One of my favorite moments from our conversation was when Jessica explained that vision without execution is hallucination, and why almost any visionary or CEO is best served by working alongside someone who helps make their ideas real.
I think that is a key component of us working together. And I think any people who are working together really closely is being able to complement each other and not being the same. So at Crisp, we use tons of assessments, and whether people are visionaries or they're more operationally structured or everything, you need variety there. And I think also a really important aspect that you mentioned, the fact that you love sales and marketing so much, you're a sales and marketing visionary, and essentially I didn't want that. And I think something about a person in this position, they have to really be okay being number two, and they have to actually love being number two. Like, I don't actually envy you or anything that you do every day.
Well, I will say, for those listening, it was a battle to even get Jessica on this podcast, just to put that in perspective. But I felt that it was a message worth sharing and that it would be valuable to people. So for those that are listening right now, let's say somebody else maybe feels that everything is a mess in their firm, they're constantly putting out fires. What's the first thing you recommend they do?
First thing, you got to take a look in the mirror. So whatever is established at your company, your firm, you've established that. If you are the CEO, if you are the owner, you have endorsed that. You know, the other day I heard a great quote, you endorse what you tolerate. And if somebody is consistently late and you're like, oh, it's okay, you're endorsing that. And the rest of the team sees that. And the biggest thing, you know, I really always focus on culture, people, processes, but your A players do not want to be around mediocre people. They just don't. It actually will deter them and push them away.
I find that ego plays a large role in driving any type of organizational change, because there was a time where I felt that the things that I wasn't good at, it was important for me to get good at them. I mean, there's business fundamentals, I think, across the board. Like, you know, if you're going to grow any organization to any level of scale, you will need organizational processes, SOPs, KPIs, all these different things that are necessary for a business to grow and scale. Yet, if that's not something that is your strength, rather than focusing on how do I develop this weakness, lean into the things that you love and are your strengths, and instead find people like yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's also people, you know, when I say people like myself, I'm a very, very structured person. Michael's not kidding. It took a very long time to get me on this podcast. So anything that's kind of outside of my norm, I really have to think about that. I have to process that. And what's interesting, though, is in this position, you have to be okay being uncomfortable. So especially you're working with a visionary CEO, you can't be entirely stuck in your ways. I actually remember when I say there were no processes, Michael at this time was making every single sale, and 1-800 number rings. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you do? Like, how do we replicate this? And we didn't have an answer. So I made a process, and then I hand Michael this beautifully packaged up process. And I said, okay, great. So here's your process. You can do something and we can test it or something. And he goes, great. You're going to shift the 1-800 number to you, and you're going to test the sales process. And I said, great. So that's how I learned to do sales at Crisp, was because I was pushed outside of my comfort zone. But I think that's really important, because you can't really grow within the company without pushing yourself to those limits.
So we got to get to it. This is the one that I think they've all been waiting for. How do we make it work? And how have we made it work all these years? Because now we're married. And I know I mentioned earlier where does someone find a Jessica? You can't have Jessica. In fact, if you want to lock down Jessica, you marry her and you have a kid. But that being said, over the years, it hasn't been easy. By no means, because I want to be honest with people that are listening. I mean, I think growing a business is difficult no matter what industry you're in, no matter what you're doing. There's just the challenges that come with that. But then also doing that with your spouse, I think, can introduce even more challenges at times.
Oh, yes. It is not for the faint of heart. It is not for everyone. I would actually say really, really look deep inside your soul if you are ever considering this. Again, you and I never had the intention of this spanning across many years. We thought it was going to be for 30 days, but there's a lot to this. I think the pro, of course, like I said before, is that you're not going to trust anyone as much as you trust your significant other, being in the business and being the one, you know, running payroll, or being the one who's mindful of budgets and how much money you're spending and all of that. But at the same time, there has to be some level of separation. And I will admittedly say, before we had a child, that separation was pretty non-existent.
Yeah, I will say there's someone running the payroll. I mean, who else could you trust more? Once, you know, our daughter popped out, we were running the payroll at the hospital.
I literally have a photo of this. So this also, though, expanded us and made me look at succession planning a little bit differently and making sure that we had layers there, because, yeah, it was time for payroll. And guess who knew how to do that? you and I. So there's actually a photo of a little newborn baby, and I'm sitting there saying, please stay asleep for just 10 more minutes. And I'm running payroll on my laptop. But also, again, who do you trust to do that? It's hard. Again, it is not for the faint of heart. And I think that routines are really important. I think that whether it is daily routines, whether it is vacation routines, but you really have to set time aside for yourselves. And, it's really hard is you and I would always say, okay, we're not going to talk about business. But the reality is that's kind of all we had to talk about. I mean, even our first date, we talked probably until midnight about work. And it was like what you were doing versus what I was doing. And that was kind of even the beginning of these conversations. So even if you say we're not going to talk about it, you'll end up talking about it.
I will say this to our credit. I believe we've done a very good job of this over the years in the sense that at the office, unless you were explicitly told, and I mean, you learn that we are married, many times I think you can go weeks or months without knowing that, we're even together. And I think that stems from the fact that at the business and in the office, it's business.
100%. You are harder on me than any person here. And I think that it should be that way. I don't want special treatment. I don't think that I deserve special treatment. It is funny that you say that, especially when we were a lot smaller, also before I was a mogul. It was not so obvious, of course, that we were together, but a team back when there were probably 10, 15 people, they actually filmed a video while Michael and I were on vacation and interviewed each person and asked how they found out that we were actually together. It was hilarious, the stories, though. I mean, people literally had no idea for months that we were together because that separation and that professionalism has to be there. That's something I've always been very wary about, too, having trained so many offices. If the significant other was, involved in the practice, I've seen it go both ways, and I have always made a very conscious effort to not just be, oh, well, that's Michael's wife and, she gets her way or anything. No, you're harder on me than any person here.
So I've seen this when people have, let's say they're in the business with their spouse. I've seen it have disastrous effects, like disastrous. I've seen relationships not only deteriorate, but end over it. It's not even just them, let's say, working together. Sometimes it's just you have the person, let's say the CEO of the firm, and then you've got the husband or wife that's at home. Let's say there's a different career path, but it's like them not knowing what they signed up for when you're in a relationship like that. And I've seen people try to make it work because, they'll hear about, well, let me bring my husband into the business, let me bring my wife into the business. I would say that, from the onset, I think look back even to the first date, because I remember we had this conversation. It was having complete clarity of like who I am and what you're signing up for and saying, hey, this is the out, because the worst thing is to figure this out years later once you're married and have kids.
Oh, yeah. So I will say that is something from the very beginning. There are even times now when you spit out some crazy idea and you're like, are you cool with this? And literally my answer every time is, I know what I signed up for. So I know exactly how ambitious it's going to be, how crazy it's going to be. But that alignment from the very beginning could not be more important. And it's interesting, too, when you say that about, someone who maybe has a stay-at-home spouse, because that also can be very challenging. And that was one thing with us working together is like, we've never questioned late nights. We've never questioned how long, someone's going to be there. And it doesn't just work on one way. I mean, there are nights where you've gone home and I'm still at the office, but we've never like challenged that or been like, where are you? Or, we're in it together and we know where we're going.
I want to touch on the fact that as the business grew and we entered just these new like levels with the business, almost like these growing pains. I mean, you have so much evolution happening in the sense that the business itself is very different from what it was back in, 2014, 15 and so on. I mean, it's just on a very, very different level of scale, and we didn't know what we didn't know. So we're learning as we go, like, with a lot of the aspects of the business. I guess let's talk about some of the really difficult times and how that's impacted us, because on the bright side, you're in it together. But then the downside, you're in it together.
Oh, yeah. It has the up and the downside of being in it together is not always being able to have that separation. So as much as you say that you're going to do it or that you want it or anything. And like I said, before a child, especially, it was way, way, way more difficult. But yeah, I mean, there are nights when we go home and we don't want to talk to each other. Like, we have had challenging days. We are not on the same page about something, and you can't take it personally. And that is honestly something that you just have to accept that and be okay with that. And it's almost kind of like at the company, if we are critiquing a video and we're giving feedback, we are critiquing that edit. We are not critiquing that as a person, as a human who did that. And so the same thing goes for the two of us. And when there's feedback, there's feedback, and it has to be constructive, but also it can't be taken personally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a fun ride. I mean, looking back, it is, I joke with people, it's like, we look at the years we've been together, it's almost like dog years, right? Because many people, when they're, in a relationship or married, in the morning they leave and go to work, and then in the evening they get home and they see their spouse. But we get up in the morning and we get our daughter ready and everything like that, and then we go to work like together.
Just having some level of boundary with all of that.
For any partnership to succeed long term, there must be trust, transparency, and complete alignment on expectations from the very beginning, especially when it comes to scaling your business. Our next guest, Kyle Backus, is an expert in this field. He and his law partner, Darren, lead one of the fastest growing law firms in the Western United States, Backus & Schenker. Needless to say, their success was not achieved overnight, but rather through a series of strategic and courageous decisions.
So probably the first decision we made was to place that first ad in the TV guide, the small ad, and to stick with it, understanding that advertising, but with a belief that advertising does work. And so that was the first one. Then the next big step that we made is putting up a website. And remember the time frame here. I think that we probably had the earliest personal injury website in Colorado that we put up in 1997. And I think our domain name of coloradolaw.net was available for whatever reason. coloradolaw.com wasn't, but we had coloradolaw.net, and we built this website. And at the time, then we started spending money advertising on a platform that was called like goto.com, which was the earliest of pay-per-click advertising, where at the time I was paying literally, I think, a nickel or 10 cents for Denver car accident lawyer or Colorado car accident lawyer on a per-click basis, which ultimately GoTo, I believe, was bought by one of the major search engines and incorporated into their, after the banner ad and the original internet web, kind of the failure, the crash of internet advertising that was then picked back up with all the pay-per-click. So that was huge. As people migrated to the internet, we were there. And that was the first promulgation of growth of our law firm, was being in that internet space and spending that money on what was that early pay-per-click advertising. And that we really became both a yellow page, then we had money for the yellow page, we became a yellow page and internet-based advertising firm, but with the heart of our firm being, we weren't just going to be claims processors, we were going to be litigators. And so we believed you could play on both sides of that fence, that you could be both terrific litigators and you could also be advertisers. And so that's the path that we pursued. That was huge. And then the next step was when we made the critical, huge decision to go on TV.
Now we got to talk about this, because it wasn't just the decision to go on TV, it was what that investment was, for what period of time, and what it was to you guys at that time, especially given the size of the firm. And I'd love if you would speak to that, because this seemed like a very pivotal moment in the firm.
You're right. It was huge. It was hugely pivotal. What happened is, again, here we are as this internet-based law firm from an advertising perspective. And we were not on TV, and there were TV advertisers, and then there was internet. And at the time, there was the beginning of this convergence of video being part of the internet. And so we had this big concern in our mind that what's going to happen with video and what's going to happen with the internet. And then something happened. And it was, I know when it was in October of 2006. And it's Google bought YouTube. So here we were, an advertiser on Google, and they buy YouTube, a video platform. At the time, maybe this was going to be the future of TV. We didn't know. So what was video doing on the internet? Well, when Google decided, I think at the time, if you look it up, it was their biggest acquisition ever. They paid over $1 billion for the acquisition of something called YouTube. And that hit me, and hit me big. And I said, we don't know what the future is of the internet, but I can tell you the future of the internet is video if Google is buying YouTube, right? Where are we on TV? Is TV going to be what the future is, or is the internet going to be TV? And we felt like we needed to be on both sides of it. And so we started looking in early 2007. And at this time, we had been a practice that had been successful. We'd been in business for 11 years at that point, had never run a TV ad. But now we said we need to be on TV because we need to hedge our bets about where is video going to be, right? And so we started looking into it, and we met with several different marketing companies that marketed primarily for lawyers. And we had serious conversations about what it would take to be a real player in the marketplace. And again, this is a long time ago. It's much worse now, probably. But we had these discussions and we were shocked. But we talked to some very honest marketers. And what we came away with was this. They said, look, if you're not willing to put up $1 million to start advertising on TV in the Denver market, don't do it. Don't do it. They said to us, if you do put up $1 million to start this campaign in Denver, you're never going to see that money again. You may see other money. That particular money is going to be gone, meaning it's going to be spent before you ever start making any money off of this. And that was a real seminal point, because that's a big gamble. We're going to put up $1 million under the prospect of this working over the long term. And Darren and I, again, look at this. At this point now, this was 2007. We're 11 and a half years into our practice. We were successful. We were doing well. We were growing. The internet was serving us very well. But what was the future going to look like? And we decided we were going to go for it. And as a result of that, we made the commitment. And the barrier to entry now in this market, I can't even imagine what it is. It's a very competitive media market. And we endured a very difficult year where they were exactly right. You get this idea that you're going to put ads up on TV and the phone's going to start ringing, and you put ads up on TV and absolutely nothing happens, and you stick with it, and you have to have faith and belief. And again, we looked at ourselves and said, well, what's the worst thing that can happen is that we don't have this, we lose this money. But the best thing that can happen is that it helps us continue to grow with the idea that we still had and we're continuing to bring to fruition, which is let's put ourselves in a position where no insurance company can take us down, because we have the firepower to continue to compete, because we have the case volume and the monetary resources to compete at the level that we imagined back in 1996.
Few firm owners have the commitment to invest $1 million into a TV advertising campaign, but this was a pivotal and, quite frankly, courageous decision that Kyle and Darren made. At the time, this meant pushing all of their chips in. I asked Kyle to elaborate on the scale of this type of investment to the firm at the time, and how he and his partner were able to remain committed to it even when the phone didn't immediately ring.
I think your characterization of all the chips in is a proper characterization. This was our willingness to participate in serious delayed gratification. In other words, it consumed the vast majority of net revenue to the entirety of the law practice. In other words, we made a commitment to earn nothing and to lose money during the implementation year. We were willing to go into the red personally for the opportunity. Now, we also fundamentally believed that we had proven to ourselves that we could earn money doing what we were doing and that we were good at what we were doing. So it wasn't without faith and belief, and it wasn't without, like, we could lose money doing this and have zero income for that year, but we felt like we could rebuild it even if that failed. We were not going to give up. We weren't going to close the doors. We were going to move on to the next bad idea, probably, right? Until we could find a path to success. If you take enough bad ideas and execute them thoroughly, something's going to work out for you. And so this was another one of those examples of let's take the risk. And we felt like, in talking to very smart people, some of whom we've had on this show already at the time, back in the day, talking to them about their practices, we really felt confident that we could weather the storm no matter where it took us. But for that particular time frame, you could not have taken a bigger risk as a practice than we took.
And I'll go back to the fact that you mentioned that you had such a clear destination on where you wanted to go. I mean, the vision for the firm was there, and also that commitment there, in the sense that you wanted to be able to support your clients at the highest level and to have the resources to take on these insurance companies. So it lends me to believe that at some point you had to make a decision like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that whether it was this decision on the TV side or what the next level of growth was going to be, there had to be another decision. Because as great as we were doing with kind of the internet-based advertising, we're in a world of change. And we saw what happened with the Yellow Pages, right? The Yellow Pages, there are a lot of lawyers who used to spend hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars a year on Yellow Page advertising, that once that market started to dry up with the internet, did they make the shift or did they ride the Yellow Pages to death, right? John Morgan, I've heard him say multiple times, I mean, the stagecoach was a hell of an idea until what? Until somebody invented the car. And if you stuck with the stagecoach, well, you're not going anywhere, right? And so I think that all along the path of the history of our law firm, we have tried to stay on the front side of technology, the front side of the marketing curve, and to try to make sure that we are committed to change, not committed to the same, but committed to change. Because if you're only committed to the same, then you're probably going to be Sears and Roebuck, right? That's committed to the same, to the death. And those that commit to change are committed to the future.
From maintaining focus and living authentically to achieving excellence and playing a bigger game, we close out this episode with a story of resilience and defying the odds from Eric Thomas, critically acclaimed author, world-renowned speaker, and international business phenom, known by millions around the world as E.T., the hip-hop preacher.
It's not in the cards every day. You know what I'm saying? Like, I still get excited, you know? I just did a commercial for the Super Bowl. You know, everybody's like, E.T., you did a commercial for the Super Bowl. I was like, yeah, after 30 years of doing this work, you know? So, but no, for me, if you ask me, it probably started when I was 16, 17 years old. I ran away from home. Now, for those who follow me, you know, I started running away from home at 13, but I didn't chronicle all of those, you know, little bitty run away from home for the weekends. But I left home for good, 16, almost 17. And man, just to be honest with you, living in abandoned buildings, eating out of trash cans, stealing out of the grocery store just so I could have food. I mean, it was rough. You know, I slept in the car when I had it, sleeping at friends' house. So it's been definitely a journey. High school dropout, you know, end up, you know, getting a career job at McDonald's. You know, and I tell people all the time, I worked at McDonald's only because it was one on Finkel in Wyoming on the west side of Detroit. That was a 24-hour McDonald's. So I literally worked from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. to have a place to stay, if that makes sense. You know, because it's so much easier going to somebody's house in the daytime, right, and just acting like you kind of just chilling than it is to go at night. People kind of know you're spending the night when you go at night. So I worked at McDonald's, man, 5-6 days a week. We only took a break to clean up. So, man, I went in at 5 o'clock. Let me tell you something. I literally tried to be the best burger flipper, because if I wasn't, it meant they would get a shift to somebody else. So I had really gotten to a place where I had learned to do everything by myself. I wanted to make sure that nobody could outwork me. Nobody could outflip burgers, you know what I'm saying? Make a filet of fish sandwich, dump fries like I could. So McDonald's was the beginning, a regular 9 to 5, really grinding, really hustling. I think that's probably where I picked up my work ethic. But before there were Super Bowl commercials, MLB, NFL, there was McDonald's.
E.T. continued to advance in his career when he made the decision to go to college, where he earned a series of degrees, including a PhD. I asked Eric to elaborate on his acquired taste for success and what motivated him to continue to grow.
You know, I'll be honest with you. Once I started, I was like, yo, this ain't bad. While nobody in my family ever got a PhD, and maybe my grandma had 14 kids, so just imagine, you know, how many cousins I have, right? So out of all my cousins, it may be 2 of us, and it doesn't make us better people, but 2 of us probably went, you know, for an advanced degree. Maybe 1 or 2 of us got a PhD. Now, I didn't have the tools or the skills when I finally got there. That's another story. But of course, you know, you can get that. But seeing other men and women who look like me, you know, the president of the university looked like me. I eventually moved, you know, in the same neighborhood. When I was in school, you know, Brian McKnight was a student. So Brian McKnight went on to, kill a game. Then we had Take 6. They went on to win Grammys. And so it was like, whoa. Then I had other friends who graduated and, you know, became CEOs or lawyers. And I was like, yo, this side of the fence, even though I didn't grow up on this side of the fence, this not a bad side of the fence. And so I'm like, well, E, you over here, you in the game, even though you never saw yourself in the game. You in the game, you might as well play to win now. I started doing things that environment affirmed, things that were valuable and valued in that community. I started running a GD program. You know, I started reading books. I started, you know, speaking, of course, and then going to conferences because I was speaking. I would go early, stay late. And I was like, you know what? This world isn't bad. Now, you do have to work a little harder in this world than I had to when I was homeless and a high school dropout. But let's be honest, I wasn't doing a whole lot in that world and I wasn't getting rewarded. In this world, I had to work a little harder, but man, the rewards were, you know, so worth it. So for me, I think that's what it was. And so, of course, imagine, it took me 12 years to get a 4-year degree. And I said to myself, like, E, why stop? You just learn how to read. You just learn how to write. Like, you just learn how to be a critical thinker. And that's the biggest part, right? Like, I'm not even really into degrees, but the critical thinking part. It was like when I was younger, I would have problems and create more problems from that problem. Whereas an adult now I'm not saying I mastered it, but I got to a point where I could start figuring out, you got to challenge, like critically think, like how can you get yourself out of this, right? And so I started to be a critical thinker. I was more analytical, like I was solving problems. And I realized that the world was treating me a lot different as a problem solver than they was as a person who created problems. Like my principals, the police, like there were a lot of people when I caused problems that they treated me a certain way and it wasn't necessarily pleasant. But when I became a problem solver, like I'm able to work in the community and fix problems, like people started treating me different. I got invited to different stuff. The check was definitely different. The circle of influence started to change a little bit. And I was like, well, I like this. So I said to myself, why stop at the 4-year degree? It took you 12 years. Like you got it now. So now I'm being recruited by Michigan State and other universities. But of course, I chose Michigan State because I'm from Detroit. My mom had a child that went to Michigan. You know, she was the smart one. Now I'm coming to Michigan State. Like my mom can brag and say, my babies went to Michigan and Michigan State. So I'm saying, yo, I finally learned how to read. Let's go. So I got the master's in 2 years. And I was like, yo, you were literally on a college campus. You work for Michigan State University. They pay for you to get a PhD. Like, why wouldn't you go get it? So for me, man, success started to taste good. And I started to develop an insatiable desire to succeed and explore and discover. And I was like Iron Man, you know, a Superman. I'm like, what can I do? I didn't even know I had these superpowers. And now I'm starting to really start use them and seeing the manifestation of these superpowers. And so now I'm tapping in and saying, man, I never even knew I was this talented or gifted. I love this life. Let me not have the destination syndrome. Right? I don't want to have this destination syndrome where it's like you get this and then you just stop. Because I saw it. I saw people who went to college when I was a GED recipient who finished in 4 years. Took me 12. I saw people who finished in 4 years, finished on time, but then they settled on that mountain. They settled on that island. You know, I saw people who were gifted and talented, but once they finished school, it was like, I did that, it's over. And I realized, oh no, that's not the name of the game. This, my friend, is a journey. It's about discovering. It's more fun to discover and explore than it is to settle. That's what happened. I started to taste a little success, and I just wanted more and more and more.
While ET is the epitome of hustle, drive, determination, and success, he acknowledges that there's a disconnect for many between desire and effort. I asked him to elaborate on how he recommends people bridge the gap between the two.
We go back to it. Fundamentals. I never said when you want to eat as bad as you want. I never said that, because you can go 30 days without eating, right? Gandhi fast. So many people fast for, 20, 30 days. I never said when you want to succeed as bad as you want to drink water. I think you could probably survive maybe 3 or 4 days without water. I said as bad as you want to breathe. You can't go 5 minutes. Like, that's brain damage. Like, you can't go 5 minutes without breathing. So what I was trying to get to both groups is that the challenge is not potential. The challenge is not even talent. The challenge is desire. They said effort is the indicator of interest, right? Effort is the indicator of interest. And so I think the biggest challenge is that people have potential. They actually have some skill set. I just think most people don't want it. Like, they don't put forth the effort. So it's like, if your effort match your dreams, like, everybody's had dreams and goals. If your effort match, so I go to NFL players and say, like, I got a client right now. I told the client the other day, I said, let's be honest, you an all-star, but you're not a superstar. It's a difference. You an all-star, and you're only an all-star because of your height. Like, you were born that way. You were given that. That's a God-given gift. But your effort does not match. It doesn't match your talent. Your talent is 120. Your effort is about 70. And I'm telling you, I travel to these corporations, these athletes, just normal people, and it's like, man, you only giving 70%. What would life look like if you gave 120%? Like, what would it look like if you actually worked for every check you got? Like, I know you want the check, but what if it looked like if you had to really work for every check? And so for me, it doesn't matter if you're poor, it doesn't matter if you're middle class, it doesn't matter if you're rich. I truly believe that the difference between humans is how bad they want it. And there's a group that wants it as bad as they want to eat. They do. You get hungry, you want to eat. There are a lot, people don't like to fast. There's a group that drink, you get thirsty. But there's a group that they want it so bad, it's like breathing. Like, they eat it, they drink it, they sleep it. And I don't think success is as much about talent as we like to believe it is. Or I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be considered one of the number one motivational speakers in the world. I don't believe I'm better than the late, great Zig Ziglar, who was my favorite. I don't believe that I'm more skilled than a Tony Robbins or a Les Brown, right? I don't believe I'm more skilled than most of the people out here that's doing this work. But I don't know how many people had the volume of content that I have. I don't know how many people getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and doing a video noon, doing a video at night when you go home. I'm giving you something so your family could be excited when you get home. Like, I don't know how many people work. Like I say all the time, your mama might have this, or your dad might be rich, or you might have a network or a net worth, but you will not outwork me. That's effort. That's heart. That's desire. Man, I just think America, I think we're slipping a little bit in terms of, when I was coming up as a kid in the 70s, America was like, no other country was even close to us. You know what I'm saying? We're like a superhero. But I believe that we're not as competitive because it seems like the effort that my grandfather had to just grind and work, like that effort doesn't seem like it's there anymore. It seems like more people want and wish, but they don't have that work ethic that we used to have. So I just believe, man, desire and effort and putting forth work, I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And I don't care where you were born or where you come from. To me, that is the difference between surviving and legacy. So there are people, 50 or 60% of the wealth that we have in this country has been passed down. But how many people can keep that? How many people can sustain that from generation to generation? And if you can, it means you work just as hard as your grandfather or great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather. So, man, effort to me is a missing element when we talk about success.
I want to give a huge thank you to every single guest who's joined me so far on this second season of the Game Changing Attorney podcast. And you, yes, you, for listening to this podcast and your commitment to learning and growing as a leader. You've been listening to the Game Changing Attorney Podcast with me, Michael Mogul. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the podcast with at least one other ambitious law firm owner who you believe would benefit. And you know what? Maybe more than one. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit GameChangingAttorney.com. And join us next time when we'll be speaking with the founding partner of Merriweather & Tharp, Bob Tharp.
I think you do have to be a little obsessive about trying to be perfect. And I think it's too easy for people to sit back and not keep trying to get better. They feel success and they're pretty happy with it. I don't know that I'll ever be satisfied. I will go all the way, always going, what can I do better? Even when I practice at the very beginning, try a case, what can I do better on that trial? I would never walk out of the courtroom practically before I didn't have a list, of 30 items I want to do better next time.
That's next time on the Game Changing Attorney Podcast.